You can support this podcast at patreon.com/partnersincrimemedia.
I'm Rebecca Lavoie, and this is Crime Writers On. Crime Writers On is the original true crime review podcast that digs into true crime, pop culture, other podcasts. And on this episode, a group of teen girls all come down with strange tics and convulsions. Is the contagion in the environment or in their heads? We'll talk about the new podcast, Hysterical, with host Dan Taberski. Joining me to get that done and more is true crime author, TV journalist, and host of These Are Their Stories podcast, my husband and love of my life, Kevin Flynn. Hi, Kevin.
Rebecca, what is your official position on mayonnaise on Jell-O?
Waldorf salad?
Yeah.
Is it a salad or a dessert?
Yeah.
I go dessert, and I would say mayonnaise is good on burgers, but not on Jell-O.
Jesus Christ.
Yeah. Mayonnaise is fucking great on burgers.
I'm a mayonnaise on burgers. I'm not mayonnaise on Jell-O.
I love frickin' Wendy's Dave Single because it's like House of Mayonnaise burgers. So frickin' good. Also with us is private investigator, certified pet detective, resident cat lady, and author of The Final Curtain, Laura Bricker. Hi, Laura.
Hey, Rebecca.
And finally, our captain of all things cynical, author of the City Trilogy of novels, host of Strange Arrivals, and our Patreon Deep Dive Book Club podcast host, Toby Ball. Hi, Toby.
Hey, Rebecca.
Toby.
Yes.
Your neck of the woods, Leroy or Leroy?
I'd never actually heard of that town.
No.
But I would say Leroy.
Same.
That's upstate, man.
Yeah, and I think he's that one woman who said it is right. It's people who are trying to be fancy calling it Leroy, right?
Yeah.
No, I'm going with Leroy. Have you seen how it's spelled?
Yeah.
How's it spelled?
How is it spelled?
L-E space R-O-Y.
Leroy.
It's two words. Leroy.
Doesn't matter.
Leroy.
Leroy. Yeah, I'm down for Leroy.
Fuck it. All right, Kevin.
I don't care.
Fuck it. I'm going with Leroy.
All right, so Kevin.
As a wise man once said, yes.
This is obviously a show. Mm-hmm. What is coming up on the next show?
Well, a show will be, we're going to be talking again about Homecoming, that podcast from way back when on Thursday, then Monday, brand new episode of Crime Writers On, where we will be reviewing the podcast Lost Hills, Dark Canyon. That's season 4 of Lost Hills.
All right. Well, I can't wait to talk about the thing we're talking about. Can we get to it, Kevin?
I'm dying to get to it.
Since we already kind of started?
Okay.
Let's dig into it.
All right.
You're making me hysterical.
Leading off.
And just about a month into the new school year, in comes a teenage girl, a high school student, presenting with unusual symptoms.
You know, wakes up one morning and full-blown vocalizations, motor tics, very prominent ones. And I thought, this is very odd.
In 2011, more than a dozen high school girls in Leroy, New York, began displaying Tourette-like twitches and tics. Health officials couldn't find a physical nor environmental cause for the symptoms and believed the teens were suffering from conversion disorder.
The symptoms in conversion disorder are real. They are actually happening. It is not faking it. It's not looking for attention. But all the tests, the EEGs, the blood work, the tox screens, normal.
But some rejected the implication their illness was all in their heads, insisting a medical cause was to blame. Was Leroy High School the site of the latest chapter in the history of mass hysteria?
But when a mystery illness is tearing through your town, settling on labels and definitions takes on a little more import. We're not just trying to categorize our lives here. We're looking to stop this thing from spreading. And we're looking for a cure. But how do you solve a mystery illness that no one can agree on?
From Wondery and Pineapple Street Studios comes the 7-part podcast, Hysterical. Host Dan Taberski looks to answer whether the teens were victims of a mysterious illness or a psychosomatic contagion. He also examines Havana Syndrome and fentanyl-exposure overdoses, other instances where victims may be affected more by suggestion than by science. Spoiler alert, we are going to be talking about plot points from Hysterical. So if you want to remain spoiler-free, go to the estimated time code in our show notes for our thumbs up or thumbs down reviews. So Kevin, before the review, we were talking about Leroy versus Leroy.
Yeah.
It says a lot about the podcaster we're talking about that we are talking about Leroy versus Leroy, right?
Yeah, because he just kind of made something out of it that was interesting. It's not unrelated to this whole thing about the community if there's like a dispute over how the town is pronounced, but Dan Taberski finds this most sublime way of getting into it and making it enjoyable. And then, to declare that he's picked a side in the Leroy debate, and then later to change sides. Fuck it, I'm going with Leroy,
Pretty much anyone under the age of 60, I would say, calls it Leroy.
All right, fuck it. I'm on Team Leroy.
But it's not just a cheap trick that Taberski does. It sets tone. It makes everyone in the story and everybody involved in the exchange seem human. It does provide a chuckle, but ultimately it has a real purpose in the narrative, usually. So it's not cheap. It's super effective.
Laura, what do you think about Mr. Taberski?
I think I would like to just walk around with him and people watch and listen to him commentate, because I feel like his observations and the way that he writes them into the script and the way that he tells stories is so relatable in a way that yeah, I'd want to hang out with this dude. It's funny, but it's never making fun, but it's done in a way that's just there was a part when he's in the CIA guy's basement and he's like, what is it about? A carpeted basement that makes me just want to wrestle or something. And it's he just has a funny way of, relating things, but he just does it so conversationally that you feel like you're out with your very entertaining, funny friend who's also extraordinarily talented at reporting and getting people to open up as they're telling their stories.
I'll tell you, the sound gathering choices he makes too, I really love. I mean, he works with one of my favorite producers in podcasting, Henry Molovsky, but I think Dan, he comes from a TV background. He used to make a show called Destroy, Build, Destroy that my kids watched when they were little. And he has a way of gathering sound where he's not afraid of noisy environments when he's making his podcast. And there's something to me that's so annoying and precious about people who feel like they have to record conversations in quiet rooms all the time. He recorded a fucking interview in a room with a guy who had cuckoo clocks all around him. And it just becomes part of the scene. The clock goes off. He's like, let's just let it go off. They have a side conversation about the cuckoo clock. It's part of who the guy is. And that is the scene. And he's unafraid to gather tape in that kind of environment. And it makes the show better. And I think every audio maker, honestly, can learn from that. So, Toby, what do you think about the story choice here?
Well, I think it's sort of a double-edged sword in that I think it's a really interesting subject. I remember when this story hit, and I think there's, a lot of historical parallels, things like that. I mean, I think the problem is that it's going to be hard to get a handle on, right? It's something that has sort of confounded people for literally centuries. So what's the best you can kind of do in that situation, unless you're going to find that there's some kind of chemical trigger or something in the ground or what have you? Is this going to have a real resolution that leaves you satisfied? Because I feel like from the beginning, trying to sort of explain this mass hysteria or psychogenic illness or however you want to sort of portray it, I think your chances for kind of bringing it to a satisfying, definite conclusion are pretty slim.
They are slim. However, it's an interesting phenomenon to explore. And it is very fucking interesting that Leroy, New York has so many toxic things in and around it, and that there are 3 gas wells on the school property. It says something about
That's
America
crazy.
that would happen. Right? I mean, it's worth looking at. It's still worth looking at. And I would be interested to know the long-term health of those kids over their lifetimes, this aside. How many people who live in that town get cancer? How many people who live in that town have jaw problems or whatever is caused by being exposed to those kinds of chemicals? How many have gut issues? Have
I mean, don't you think that would have come up?
Well, that's not what it was
once they
about.
start looking into the environmental stuff, you think that would have been part of one of the things they would be Aaron Brockovich would come in and be like, look, you've got these cancer clusters, you've got this, you've got that.
Maybe.
But it's not there.
But very often cancer clusters are not discovered because cancer clusters happen to disparate kinds of people over different ages over a long period of time. Honestly, I only learned this because of PFAS reporting, but cancer clusters can go undetected for a very long period of time.
How do they become a cluster?
They only become a cluster when a lot of people get them within a very short period of time, but then all of a sudden a pattern over a long period of time gets revealed.
You're harshing my Taberski mellow here.
I'm sorry. I'm only saying this because we've done a bunch of reporting on PFAS in my newsroom. That's the only reason I know any of this. Okay, back to hysteria.
Yeah.
Kevin,
Yeah.
Is it not very funny that the woman doctor sees her first 2 patients and goes to her male boss and says, we're going to have a big fucking problem. And he's like, no. We're going to be fine. No, nothing's
Calm down,
going
little
on.
lady.
Nothing's going on here.
I don't know an answer that won't get me smacked.
I mean, it's a lady problem,
It's
right?
a lady problem.
Hysteria.
Don't worry your pretty little head over it. Let the men worry about this one.
But it's funny that the doctor did not recognize, like she did not acknowledge that particular irony. Or I know it's not irony, but I thought it was funny.
Yeah, she was very restrained on that point. And so is Taberski.
But do you agree that the word hysteria is a gendered word?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think, and so even when it's directed at men, it's like double-edged. It's also like, you're hysterical and you're a girl. Like,
Right.
And there needs to be a way to like use the word in a more clinical application that sheds like the fanciful gendered implications of you're hysterical. I mean, probably that's why they use the term conversion disorder, because it sounds more clinical and on its face doesn't sort of bring the same sort of gendered predisposition for misogyny, with it or whatever. I mean, I think you know what I'm trying to say here.
Yes.
But I do believe in mass hysteria. So,
but the symptoms are real. I mean, this is the whole thing that I think kind of gets lost. Is sometimes the symptoms are real, and that kind of gets lost. If people are suffering. And they feel like they're being accused of being crazy, but their symptoms are real.
Agreed. Yeah.
It reminds me of I have friends that had long COVID and they thought they were like, everyone thinks I'm crazy because I'm having these symptoms. Or
Some
like
people think long COVID, certain types of long COVID are a psychogenic illness.
Yeah.
Just so you know, that's out there.
Yeah. Lyme disease. I have friends that have Lyme and they can't find doctors.
Chronic Lyme, so-called chronic Lyme.
Lyme. They don't believe they have it. And like pandas in this, like that's one of those things you'd hear randomly with somebody's kid and you're like, what is that? My takeaway, like as I'm thinking about this, is like these are things where you start to think you are like losing your mind because nobody believes you. And I really felt like, because like you said, Rebecca, people are having symptoms. They are having things that are happening to them. It just can't be specifically diagnosed in a way that conforms with like the medical community in a way that we understand, right?
Yeah. What do you think, Toby, about this? Because I don't think people are necessarily making the connection that there are very sick people and whatever the illness is, like this Leroy situation, like they are sick, right?
Yeah. So I found this kind of frustrating, but it is right. I mean, you can be sick and have it be from conversion disorder, I think. I mean, I think there's plenty of things that sort of stem from sort of the brain-body connection, right? I mean, that's why placebos are effective at times. There's all kinds of things that kind of show that. I just kind of think like there's this whole idea of, if you can't find a physical reason, then it's all in your head, which means you're making it up. And that's not necessarily the case. Your symptoms are real. The way you feel is real. But what the mechanism for that is mental. So it was a little like everybody's like, oh, it's not, trust me, I know my body and it's not in my head. It's like, well, it's not in the head the way you're thinking about it. It's
right.
Not in your head like you're just making this all up or you're confused or whatever. But it does suggest a different way of kind of treating it. I think Dan like kind of lets you figure that out for yourself. Like he doesn't bang you over the head with it. And he talks about how it's tough. Like you feel like a jerk when you're saying it's psychogenic to somebody who's saying no, it's real, and you're sort of telling them that it's not, but it just doesn't feel as though that should be something that's sort of a pejorative or a negative. I mean, it's just the way it is. It doesn't take away from your personal experience of being sick.
Yeah, it's like people can't get around the idea that because it's in your head doesn't mean you're making it up. Right. Those two things can be true at the same time, that you're not faking the tics or faking your passing out, your overdose, but the things that you think that are causing that may not be, it is probably, your mind, because you're right. There are things that we still don't understand about how our bodies and our minds work, but we have seen this happen in other things. And a lot of times we immediately go from like, there's no medical reason for this, that it's psychological or psychogenic or psychosomatic or whatever, that we immediately go to A, you're making it up, B, you're a faker. You are, and it's a poor character trait. So it's somebody saying something bad about you as opposed to this is the illness that I have. And it ends up being like we want to like focus more on like, well, where does this come from? And why are you displaying tics? Or why is it that you have like this inner ear thing? You know, why is it that you have shell shock or, you know, these kinds of things? They're not making it up, but just because they think it might be caused by this, or, you know, if you give it a drug, it's going to go away because of that. Both things can be true.
Well, you know, a lot of people didn't, and I'm just going to say this because this is the counter to that. For a long time, people did not understand autoimmune diseases and thought they were psychogenic illnesses, right? Mm-hmm. For a long time, people did not understand and are still not understanding the gut-body connection and think that there's psychogenic illness having to do with things relating to the gut and the body. And that all that science is now bearing out. So there's a lot of stuff that I think sometimes will be explained in the future that, you know, we are now or in the past have called a psychogenic illness that does actually have an explanation or could. And I think that sometimes people are sick and they know it. And then so I understand the urge to resist. I really, really do. I think the whole idea of diagnosing the Salem girls with psychogenic illness is so fucking stupid because this happened hundreds of years ago and there's no way to know. And it's just as likely to have been that ryegrass thing as it is to have been this. And to say it's definitively this, you don't fucking know. It was hundreds of years ago, everybody. Calm the fuck down. It literally could have been anything. And so, you know, it's
more important as a totem for that kind of...
They weren't witches. We know they weren't witches. How about that? We can for sure say they were not witches.
Well, the ones that floated.
So I think, I mean, the idea that somebody's health is connected to their surroundings or their, you know, social situation is old. Right? Like that's what shamanism is about is trying to heal the community in order to heal the person. So it's not like this is something that's novel and new. It's sort of like an old sort of conception of illness. And I guess we'll talk about it in a minute, but I think he brings in some interesting context to this discussion, especially when he's talking about like people who had shell shock and things like that. The things that he brings in as comparisons, I thought, it wasn't apples to apples, really, in a way that I kind of found also a little frustrating at times.
They weren't apples to apples, but they affected men, which I think was important. So, you know, I think that's one of the reasons why he chose those examples in some way.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that makes some sense. I don't know.
But the thing with it is that it is mysterious. If you can say, oh, well, these are definitely the things, then there wouldn't be a medical mystery here about why these things happen, right? You know, it's like when you invest in something, you want to know what you're going to be getting. Like when you invest in our Patreon.
Just like that.
It's exactly the same thing. Don't become mass hysterical.
Don't.
I'm just saying.
Just remember the brain is also part of the body.
Brain is also part of the body.
Just like our Patreon is also part of your daily diet of content.
It absolutely is. If you join us at patreon.com/partnersincrimemedia, I can tell you, we thought that like summer was going to be a slow time for us, but it hasn't been.
It's been wild.
Rebecca, do you know how many exclusive podcast episodes we had on Patreon in the month of June?
4.
We had 33 podcast episodes.
Wow.
They include things like Married with Podcast, Laura Bricker's Leave It to Bricker podcast, Married with Podcast, Rebecca's Game Show, Other People's Problems, and Toby Ball's Deep Dive Book Club podcast, as well as Rebecca's near daily installments of the Karen Reed themed Readathon. And Rebecca, we're just about 2/3 of the way through July. Do you know how many exclusive podcast episodes we've already had?
4.
27.
What?
And we still have a week and a half to go.
Wow.
All sorts of great stuff.
Including my banger of an interview with Turtle Boy, in which I both pushed back on him and let him talk, and he maybe had the line of all lines in any interview ever.
Which is?
I'm a dick to dicks.
Just be a dick to dicks.
Yeah.
As Toby said, it's like Dexter, a serial killer, just kills serial killers. Yeah, exactly. We also have, at Patreon, we have our Crime Writers on After Show. This week, we're going to be talking about the Emmy nominations. A bunch of stuff got nominated for Emmy Awards. I've got the list. Some of these are things that we have already covered, and we're just going to kind of go back and get our thoughts. There are other things that we may have watched that might be in competitions that wasn't part of Crime Writers on. Or let's get out the knives and we'll cut a bitch on who should be the winner. We have an Amazon storefront. You can see some of our favorite things. Rebecca, what are this week's CWO Amazon recommendations?
Got a dark horse. Okay?
Okay.
You ready for it?
Yeah.
I think everyone, if they need it, should buy a Nectar mattress on Amazon. Just bought one for Teddy. Very freaking high quality, high rated mattress, like on Wirecutter and shit. I got it on Amazon. They have a special Nectar mattress you can buy on Amazon. It's fucking fantastic.
And Toby Ball, what are your listener-inspired Toby Ball's deep cut recommendations?
We got a theme today. Let's see if you can figure out what it is. First off, we got the Ezert Solar Bird Bath Fountains 3.5W. Glass panel solar fountain pump for bird bath. No battery solar water fountain outdoor with 4 fixed pipes, 7 nozzle.
That's nice.
Ooh, the 7 nozzle?
So the water circulates in your bird fountain. That's nice.
Yeah, I guess that's right. Second up, and this is where you're going to have to put on your thinking caps to figure out what the theme is.
All right.
Perky Pet 336-1 SR Squirrel Begone Bird Feeder. 2-pound squirrel-proof outdoor wild bird feeder with weight-activated perches.
Nice. So is the theme ornithological in nature?
It's about keeping birds happy.
Nice. I had to put a squirrel baffle over our hummingbird feeder because it was full of that juicy, like, sugar juice. And I looked out one day and a squirrel was drinking out of it, like a pirate drinking out of a barrel of rum.
Well, that's why you need Squirrel Begone.
Yeah.
You can shop us first at amazon.com/shop/Crime Writers On. Hey, did you miss Prime Day? Go back and look at other stuff, but stop there first. Amazon.com/shop/Crime Writers On. We earn commissions on qualified purchases.
All right, Kevin, I know it's almost time to end the business section.
Yes.
But before we do, I have to ask, do we have any Patreon patron saints of the week this week?
Our Patreon patron saints are Ron Peck and Elsa Burke. Bless you.
Bless you, Ron. Bless you, Elsa. And Elsa, if your last name is Bork, just know we were thoughtful and we chose Bork.
We had a long discussion. We had a long off-air discussion.
Thus ends the business section. I'm going to go ahead and fade that music out right now. So before the break, Toby, we were talking about Havana Syndrome and the fentanyl overdoses not being perfectly analogous to the Leroy kids. But you have another note about Havana Syndrome, and I wanted to give you an opportunity to talk about that episode.
Yeah, so the Havana Syndrome thing, again, it's, it was covered in the press, so I think most people know what the basics are. But when the CIA agent is like pretty adamant that what he had was caused by something else, like it's not psychogenic. He says when it happened to him, he was in Moscow. He was pretty chilled out. He wasn't thinking about the Havana Syndrome. And so then it couldn't be psychogenic, right? Because he wasn't stressed at that time and he didn't really have the Havana Syndrome thing on his mind. But it sort of misses the point in that it doesn't have to be immediate stress right at that moment. Like soldiers who had shell shock were coming back and they were, back in England and they were still sort of exhibiting these problems. I don't think those problems were probably displayed as reactions to what they were experiencing to them. It doesn't have to be something that's in the front of your mind, and the stress doesn't have to be at that very instant. But the fact that both things are present can allow that to come out, I think. It doesn't have to be in a moment of great stress. It can be stress that builds up over time. It can be stress that you're not experiencing sort of consciously, but subconscious stress. And then, even though he wasn't thinking about Havana Syndrome, it certainly was something he knew about and was aware that that was something that had affected other people.
When I talk like this and stuff, when my wife hears it later, she's like, you sound like a lunatic.
It is a weird vibe, though. I will say, you do sound like a lunatic a little bit.
We were killing people who were trying to kill Americans. Sorry. That's just fine. And, and so, I'm sure a psychiatrist will say, okay, you actually need a lot of therapy based on that. Not in my old world. I was just fine with that.
One of the interesting things was like how freaking defensive people got once you brought that up. Like, it was just like, no. Like, I'm not the type of person who would have that.
I'm just going to say, who was more defensive? Was the anti-Havana Syndrome guy. That guy was way more strident than the CIA guy. That guy.
Yeah, well, I don't think he wasn't a good guy to be making that case, right? I mean, he was
just a dick to dicks.
Yeah.
He was just a dick.
He was too strident. He was too sure of himself. And he doesn't come off well.
I'll tell you, anti-Havana Syndrome people a lot of them are like that. if you see them on Twitter, if you read about them, I'm like, and I've long, because we did an episode about Havana Syndrome on one of the podcasts I oversee at NHPR. It's called Operation Confirmation Bias. The episode, by the way, the show is called Outside In. It's a great episode because while Sam, the older host, was reporting it, something really fucking freaky happened. It's like creepy, like maybe like we were talking to someone in Cuba and something really creepy happened. Anyway, and when we put it out, it didn't land on it definitely exists or not, but it was kind of about this creepy thing that happened. When we put it out, all of these people without listening to the episode came on the attack. And I found myself thinking like, what is in it for you that you're so angry about this? And I understand people are very anti-CIA or whatever, but they're fucking angry about Havana Syndrome. People are like real angry about it. Laura, speaking of angry, Brockovich, man, turns out that she's exactly like she's portrayed in the movie. Who knew? According to the guy who works with her anyway.
Yeah, because like she never actually showed up. She just had her underlings out there doing the work. And then she got waylaid somewhere else. But yeah, I mean, it was just, first of all, context of like, wow, how long ago that she came into sort of my awareness when that movie came out and we learned about her. And I'm like, wow, she's been doing this, what did they say, for 30 years? That she's been doing this kind of work now?
Yeah.
It was a long time. And first of all, she bursts into the school. Her people burst into the school and they're taking samples without permission. And then they're like, well, of course they're mad. They're always mad when they're covering something up. So so I liked the intrigue and that where we're like drumming up that the school is hiding something and Brockovich's people are out there. But I was a little sad that after all of the work they did to try to identify something environmental or chemical or whatever, that there wasn't anything like that. Because I was like, God, this town is a disaster right now with all the things. And when you hear about like the stuff that's out there, that's underneath the field, and you're like, oh, this could, and the train, was it the train derailment?
Mm-hmm. Barrels of with like skulls and crossbones on them in the woods.
Yeah, I'm like, there's a lot happening in this town. And you're like, this is prime for like
and the Jello.
And you're like, oh, yeah.
Yeah,
I'm
who
like,
knew Jello was so toxic?
But yeah, I liked that window because it was like when they were like, I think the title of the episode was like waiting for Brockovich. And then she didn't show.
Yeah.
She wasn't needed there.
Okay, she gets on these things and she's like, oh, Bob, this is just me and my stick-to-itiveness. Or, I've got a feeling here and I'm always right. And I'm like, shut up, bitch. I know you're right. Will you just leave me alone and let me figure this out?
Their staff meetings must be so uncomfortable.
Here's what I appreciated about including all of these different angles into this is like, you're examining every possible cause that could be behind what's happening. Aside from like, I don't know, people having like seances and I don't know, whatever, but every possible cause that's logical. So I appreciated that was all fleshed out before then kind of zooming out on all these other cases of situations where people were having mystery illnesses and mystery symptoms. I think that was like a good segue.
Yeah. So Kevin, even though it was an imperfect analog, I was really glad they did the fentanyl episode. Yeah. This is something that really bothers me. It does, as they say, put people in prison for like harming police officers.
Right.
And it is so obviously not fentanyl when somebody gets hyped up, loss of breath, whatever, because fentanyl puts you to sleep.
Well, I mean, they did a good job of sort of spelling this out that, doctors and nurses are handling this or exposed to it all the time in the hospital.
Guy would roll around in a champagne glass full of fentanyl.
I know. I think that'd be great. Dan should really like double down on the insurance company to have him do that. But, it's so clear that like the actual science says like, this does not happen, but they persist because it's like they describe it as a line of sight condition.
Yeah. We should just describe for our listeners what we're talking about in case they haven't gotten there or haven't listened.
Right. Well, you've seen or heard of instances of like police officers or other first responders passing out or being exposed to fentanyl or carfentanil or one of these kinds of opioids and breathing it in and then having an overdose. And they need to be touching it. They have to be resuscitated. They get Narcan or something like that. And there was a great example that they had on tape of a prosecutor in court who believed that she began to have symptoms and attributed to exposure of trace amounts of fentanyl in an evidence bag.
Take a break.
Down goes Collins. The witness jumps off the stand and catches her just before she hits the floor.
We'll take about a 10-minute break. You can leave the room if you wish. Just remember to have additions. Watch here.
But it's just that the parts per thousand and everything like that, how much you need to actually overdose, scientifically that just doesn't work. So like what is happening there? It's the same kind of thing. There isn't like one size fits all for psychogenic instances, right? And like if among the four of us, if we're looking for the one size fits all, that's like we're going to say like not all of these work, but they work in their own way because they are, things that are suggestive and that the reaction doesn't equal the known science around it. Particularly with the fentanyl. And why is it cops? Because they've seen other cops do. I mean,
disagree.
Who is patient one? Who is the typhoid Mary of these things? Like we have here in Leroy, and I'm going with Leroy. Fuck it, it's Leroy. There was a student who had Tourette's, and then can we draw the inference that it was that student that planted the contagion in the first girl's mind and it just kind of went off from there? It's possible. So I don't know, Rebecca.
Do you know why I think it's cops?
Why?
Because then they get to arrest somebody. So they get a result from getting like the overdose of fentanyl.
Okay.
No,
that's
I'm not
fine.
saying
That's your thing.
I'm not saying some
that's
of
your
them,
thing. But somebody is yelling at their podcast
if some of them feel
episode
the overdose, that's
because
fine.
they're saying that is exactly the kind of thing that they said about the Salem witches, right? You attribute an ulterior motive for the behavior when we've just gone through this whole thing.
Why was the video made? Why was the original video made to talk about cops not touching fentanyl? It was an anti-crime video made.
Sure. And the wrong takeaway, no one is like, these are the suggestions you should have for your psychogenic thing. It just was the wrong thing.
Correct.
And it got into, and that's like, the wrong thing got into people's heads.
Right.
And it continued on. But I do not think, unless...
I'm not saying that they're doing it for attention or anything.
I mean, I think that's right.
That's literally not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is,
but
I think there's a difference between a psychogenic illness that does not benefit anybody at all. It's like the stakes are high with the opioid thing. The stakes are high. People are going to prison, and it's just like and I was so impressed by that cop who went on the news and was like, no, that's definitely not what happened. Like with that prosecutor. Mm-hmm. Like I was very impressed by that because you don't see that. And you don't see the news reporters like including that kind of tape. You know what I mean? You don't see them seeking out the alternative point of view. I have seen so many news stories about these cops being overdosed by touching drugs.
Yeah.
I appreciated the woman, the DA, actually like being so forthcoming about like when that guy was saying that she was faking and she like called him up and like reamed him a new one. I was like, I liked that sort of behind the scenes footage on that part.
Yeah. She's still sure it happened though, even though her symptoms don't match an overdose.
But something happened to her. But
something
it wasn't.
happened when she squeezed that bag.
It's like we just said. Everything we said about the teenagers applies here too, guys. It's like something actually did happen.
She's trying to get a conviction in court.
They're saying that the science, does not back that up. The scientists are like, that's definitely not what happened. But you're not making it up. Something actually happened to you. Something actually made you get sick. It wasn't this thing that you think it is.
So I thought it was just like two different things. Like I thought something happened to her and then she looked around. She's like, what could it possibly be? Oh, I must have like done the fentanyl.
Right.
Yeah, could be. Yeah,
very much could be that.
The cops, I think, my sense from this and then from some other stuff is that, I think they just got so much scare stuff about fentanyl that it's like if somebody tells you that like this kind of spider is super dangerous and it jumps on you and you freak out and faint or something, it's like you're so primed to be scared of it. When logic tells you there's all these fentanyl users who aren't instantly overdosing every time they touch a bag with fentanyl in it. It's nonsensical to think that this would actually happen. But I do think it got into a lot of people's minds that if I get any of this on my skin, like you're going to have to Narcan the hell out of me or I'm going to die. And I think that kind of leads to it. And are they doing it also to get their arrest stats up? Maybe.
We're very lucky that Narcan doesn't kill people. I'm just going to say
it seems as though it would be like if you're a defense attorney, like a public defender for these people who get in trouble for it, it just seems like it would be such an easy case to make, but who knows?
Yeah. Toby, what do you think about the doctor that we heard, the doctor in Argentina who was talking about mass hysteria and she was like relating it to the shell shock patients, right? I believe that was the episode where it came in or it came in sort of in that section, and she talked about it being about listening. Right. And it being about hearing something that they're trying to say.
Right.
That was a very interesting passage because she sort of delivered that section in a way that it really drove home the brain being part of the body for me without talking about biology, so to speak.
Yeah, it was interesting. I mean, I think she says they don't want to hear, they want to be heard. In that, I guess this is some sort of subconscious way of acting out to get attention, to have something taken care of. I liked it because I felt as though she was at least coming in with a kind of answer, right? Or at least a perspective on what's behind the whole thing, where I think a lot of people were like, it's psychogenic. It's not psychogenic. It's psychogenic. I'm not the kind of person who has psychogenic things. And then she's like, well, we know that these things exist, and this is kind of like our best thought about why. So, I thought that was good. I wish there had been a little bit more of that, maybe from people who weren't, Freudians, kind of talking about some of that stuff, but there wasn't.
Laura, what about this boy? One boy in Leroy who ends up getting the Leroy syndrome, fuck it. And nobody believes him. Not even Jessica.
I know. And they're like, where is he now? Probably in jail.
Oh, Jessica.
Like, turns out he's not in jail, but he doesn't live in Leroy anymore. And he's busy on his job. So I thought that was good because we're talking about, like, again, going back to the beginning, like this concept of like hysteria and like hysterical women. And then here's this one guy and everyone's like, oh yeah, they all remember that one guy. Oh yeah, he was faking. Oh yeah, he wasn't real. And it's interesting to see the tables turned in terms of the way that it's perceived by the people who were exhibiting the symptoms, that the girls. Now, when there's a boy coming into it, that's like, well, he must be faking. And you're like, so wait a minute. So you were supposed to believe you, but we're not supposed to believe him. And I felt for him as they were there talking to him, because it was clear, like at the time, like he really felt that he's just being cast aside, and how strange it was. But I thought that was a super interesting perspective, because I feel like when we hear about these cases, because I feel like this case was actually like fictionalized into a book a few years ago.
It was.
It might have been like,
I believe it was a book by Megan Abbott, and she made it about a pond or something like that with green slime. Yes.
Yeah. And so, and I think there was so it's always, when you see this, it's like, again, we were talking about like gender role. It's like always like the women or the girls. And so here's this guy and you're like, okay, we're breaking tradition, but nobody believes him.
Yeah.
So I thought he was good to have in there, because it definitely kind of showed it wasn't quite as black and white as we're thinking, if we're kind of grouping people together in terms of who is most likely to experience something like this.
So Kevin?
Yeah.
Dan gets called a chicken by his producers for not confronting the district attorney and telling her what the conclusion was that she did not, in fact, have a fentanyl overdose.
I got into a fight with my producers about this episode. I mean, not a physical fight, but I'm not afraid of those chumps. We argue because they think I'm chicken shit. That after laying out all this information, they wonder why I just don't come out and say that I think Annika Collins was a victim of mass psychogenic illness, and that this example seems particularly clear-cut. Frankly, it's harder than I thought it'd be.
Do you think that Dan is a chicken?
A little, a little bit. But I mean, I think it's the best bit of transparency about the podcast, where he comes right out and he says, well, my producers, we're fighting with me. They think I'm chickening out. But he has that conversation with the audience very thoughtfully and acknowledges the situation and explains why. Maybe he's not being fully honest. Well, maybe he's not being fully honest out of courtesy. Like you said, I think that his position is, I believe that something happened to you. But also, all these other signs point towards it being, a psychogenic reaction here, that it being conversion disorder. But he doesn't have to get into an argument with them over it, right?
Right.
And, that's sort of the great thing about a Dan Taberski podcast is it's not merely the destination, but it's the journey. And so the way that this whole thing is presented over these 7 episodes, it's just so enjoyable and thought-provoking and goes down so easy. We spent a lot of time talking about, mass hysteria, when we really could have spent 2 hours just talking about how strong Dan Taberski's writing is, his voice. Like you said, we could just have him, read from the telephone book, and it would be enthralling, because he's totally on his game here. But that doesn't mean he doesn't deliver the goods. I mean, whoever thought like The Line would be a Dan Taberski podcast, and he totally delivered.
That's my favorite one.
Yeah, so he's not just like looking for fluff pieces so that he can be clever about them. He's looking at stuff that's interesting, and he brings it in an interesting way, but he also does it in his voice. So, like I said, sometimes it's not the book, it's the author. And I feel like that's in this case.
All right, let's do what we do. Let's let our listeners know, should they check out Hysterical? It's from Wondery and Pineapple Street Media. And right now, episodes are available on Wondery Plus. Laura Bricker, what do you think? Thumbs up or thumbs down for Hysterical?
Yeah, I'm going thumbs up with this. Anytime something comes out with Dan Taberski, it feels like I'm going to be hanging out with this like fun, quirky, intelligent friend who is also a great reporter who is going to tell a good story in a way that is relatable and interesting and also examines it from all the angles that you might not even think are there, because that's the way that he approaches a case. And this is, I remember when this happened with this school in this area, which is the kickoff for this podcast, you know, girls in a school having all these unexplained, like kind of Tourette's-like outbursts and tics and things. And I've seen it fictionalized. So it was really interesting to sort of hear that case reflectively, but also get some perspective kind of on the bigger issue of these type of illnesses and these type of symptoms and other cases. So I thought it was really interesting. So I would go thumbs up with this.
Toby Ball, thumbs up or thumbs down for Hysterical from Dan Taberski?
I'm a thumbs up as well. I don't think I liked it as much as everybody else did, but the bar with Dan is pretty high. He's obviously one of the top voices in our industry. I think the subject matter is interesting. You know, I think he likes to tell stories, right? And there's a lot of stories in this. And at times, I kind of felt like maybe the stories didn't exactly go towards helping us understand sort of the central issue, or they would help you, like, instead of directly addressing it, it was sort of off, slightly tangential, but still somewhat connected. And it's not that the stories weren't interesting or well told, but in the end, I kind of felt like that we probably could have gotten more about what was actually going on. I mean, he talks to, you know, one or two people who try and sort of contextualize and provide an explanation of what's going on with psychogenic illnesses or mass hysteria. And it probably could have used some more of that. I don't know. I mean, it's good. It's better than 99% of the stuff that's out there. But as far as if I take a look at Dan Taberski's like collection of works or whatever, I don't think this is like in one of his top like 2 or 3. That being said, it's an absolutely solid thumbs up. It's just when you hear him coming out with something, you're like hoping he'll surpass his best thing that he's done. And I just don't think it was quite there this time.
Kevin Flynn.
I hated the music. Thumbs down.
I fucking love the music.
The violin?
You're wrong.
What about the little boop? Did we hear that already?
You're wrong.
Okay, I'm wrong about that, but I'm not wrong about this podcast. It's a big thumbs up. Dan Taberski, like we said, well, I mean, what more can we say? You understand, if you've listened to any of Crime Writers On, you know what we think of him. I feel like he definitely delivers here. It's because he has a natural interest in people, and I think that comes through in the way that we hear him talk to his interview subjects. He's not just digging out like a detail about a cuckoo clock because it's colorful and it will like lead into all of his hard-hitting questions. He does it because he finds that interesting and finds a way to weave it into sort of a larger picture about what's going on. And he just seemed to have a natural curiosity about what was happening with these girls. And he certainly they will present in this podcast lots of different options, not just what one would think of as mass hysteria. And in the end, it may be for you, dear listener, to decide what you think. But Dan Taberski is definitely the one to ask the question and for you to go along with him on this journey of his. I can't wait for the next thing. So thumbs up.
Yeah, I'm a thumbs up too. By the way, I'm just scrolling through my past communications with Dan Taberski about previous podcast reviewed of his. There's a fun text from him from April of 2019. Would you like to read what it says?
Yeah, it says, I forget which one we were talking about that time, but he says, maybe this is my big chance for a Toby thumbs up.
I don't think you had given a thumbs up previous to that on anything.
Yeah, it wasn't surviving Y2K. It's probably running from cops is what it was coming, yes.
Anyway.
I loved running from cops.
I know
and
you
I
did.
liked the 9/11 one, and I liked the
I know. I believe you had some criticisms about the Y2K one, but that was your first thumbs up. You loved running from cops before that. I believe you were thumbs sideways or whatever.
It was the Richard Simmons thing.
Yeah. Anyway, I love Dan Taberski. Right now, I will say The Line still ranks as my number one Dan Taberski podcast. I think that thing was fucking perfect. I like this podcast a lot. It's just really, really excellent. I do think that two of the things that they present in here are not perfect analogs to the main story. And I love the way the main story is done, especially the contemporary interviews with the people involved are just so well done. And it's really, really hard to get people to talk about what they used to be like really hard, because people like very often paint a portrait of themselves when they were younger. And they want to remember it differently than it was. And Dan is so good at interviewing that talking to a teenage girl as an adult and feeling like you actually are meeting the teenage girl because she's so like truly representing what it was like. It's just really, really good. And those were my favorite parts of this podcast. So yeah, big thumbs up for me for Hysterical for a variety of reasons, but mostly because of the interviewing, the field tape, and just sort of the general storytelling of it. So yeah, thumbs up for me for Hysterical. Now it's time for my favorite part of the podcast, a little something I like to call the Crime of the Week. Dan Thomas is probably England's biggest soccer fan. Dan rushed out to get a tattoo of England's winning Euro 2024 trophy on his arm. He probably should have waited, though, because they lost 2-1 to Spain in the finals. Thomas says he doesn't regret getting the intricately detailed trophy inked on his bicep. In fact, he's calling on other Three Lions fans to do the same. Ever the optimist, he says it will be an easy fix to turn the 2024 into 2028 after the next European Championship. But we hope he's learned his lesson about patience. Panel, the soccer fan jumped the gun. What other thing should he have waited for? Laura Brecker, what do you think?
I mean, I'm hoping he didn't also make a marriage proposal during this whole melee that occurred and got, that I think that would have been a little next level.
Get a wedding ring tattoo.
No, exactly.
What do you think, Toby? What other thing should this soccer fan have waited for?
His Liz Truss back tattoo.
I don't know what that means. What does that mean?
She's the one who she was like the prime minister for like 3 weeks. And one of the papers was like, what's going to last longer, her prime ministership or this head of lettuce? And the head of lettuce won. Anyway,
the head of lettuce
that's a shout out to you English people.
What do you think, Kevin Flynn?
I think he should wait on the Toby Ball thumbs up tattoo just in case.
Just in case. All right, that's going to do it.
Take nothing for granted.
That's going to do it for us. But before we go, Laura Bricker, do we have a cat of the week this week?
We have something fun coming to us from Megan Nelson in the official Crime Writers on Facebook discussion group. Megan sends in Lady Emu. The emu has been on the lam in her area for 2 years. It was caught and returned to her mob of emu friends this week after 2 years on the run. I'm just bringing this up because we had an elusive emu here when I was a reporter years ago in Raymond. And we had this little intern that we sent out to cover the story, and the police tried to catch the emu and they lassoed it and it died because it choked itself to death. And the intern was so traumatized. So I'm happy that Lady Emu did not meet the same fate. Megan, thank you for showing me things can turn around in the emu world.
Remember that one that escaped from Vermont and made it all the way to Bow, Kevin? And then they drove it back to Vermont in a Toyota Prius in the back seat.
Jesus,
and there was this hilarious photo of this emu sitting in the back of a Toyota Prius, just like a dog.
Oh, God.
Yeah, it was ridiculous. All right. Laura Bricker, if folks want to reach out to you and get news clips about loose emus in New Hampshire, how can they find you online?
At Laura Bricker. Send me all your emu stuff.
Toby Ball, what about you? How can you be found?
At Toby Ball and H.
Kevin Flynn, what about you?
It's Kevin P. Flynn.
And if you want to follow me on Twitter or Instagram or anywhere else, you can find me at Reb Lavoie. You can also follow the show everywhere at Crime Writers On. And I encourage you to join our incredible community in our official Crime Writers On Facebook discussion group. We also have a regular old Facebook page. Join us there if you'd like. Get episodes early and ad-free at patreon.com/Partners in Crime Media. You'll also get the Crime Writers On After Show, Married with Podcast, Laura Bricker's Leave It to Bricker podcast, and Toby Ball's Deep Dive Book Club podcasts. Our theme song was composed and performed by Ty Gibbons. Our editor is the wonderful Livy Burdett. The producer of this program is Kevin Flynn.
He's the executive producer of this program.
This show was recorded in Studio C, The Closet, in our New Hampshire basement, where we will never, ever, ever, ever put mayonnaise on Jell-O. But I will put that shit on my burger. On behalf of all the crime writers, thanks so much for listening. We will catch you later.
I think about Dan Taberski and I sitting in the same bar in 1993, like ships passing in the night. drinking beers.
Did that happen, or is this just imagining?
I mean, I didn't check my calendar to see if it matched up, but I certainly went to the big hunt a fair amount.
The big
The
hunt.
big hunt.
Guess who's here at the big hunt? Your mom.
Partners in Crime Media.